Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting over Episode 2 of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So, we get a bit of a change in scenery from the previous episode. While the Elric brothers were formerly in the capital of Emestris, now they're heading out to the countryside, and presumably they have a lead on the Philosopher's Stone. Now, interestingly, when they're reading up on the Philosopher's Stone here, they mention Xerxes, which sort of becomes, if not a plot point, I guess relevant later. It's interesting that they're sort of laying the foundations this early on. So here we have the Elric brothers much younger and fully embodied as they were beginning to learn the practice of alchemy. And I think this is probably as good a time as any in the narrative to discuss this material because it takes place in a much more idyllic setting, similar to the countryside they were passing through on the train. So, one of the interesting things about Fullmetal Alchemist, and the mentioning of an epidemic sort of triggered this, but it reminds me very much of, turn of the century Europe and America, like early 1900s. The level of technology is comparable, and, well, if this were a couple years ago, I could say, the thought of raging epidemics would be consigned to history, for want of a better term. I know it's not strictly like the real-life 1900s, but it bears a lot of similarities. If nothing else, I always thought it was an interesting time period. So notably, we're also introduced to Winry Rockbell for the first time. And she's a good friend of the Elric brothers and one of the sort of main supporting cast. Her relationship is sort of complex, as she's sort of like an adoptive sister to them, as much as a childhood friend. So it's becoming clear that no matter what, the Elric brothers are always focused on alchemy, even when they should be paying attention in class. So, the Elric brothers make an astute observation about a leap of faith and imagination that it takes to make breakthroughs. But unfortunately, they're applying that to human transmutation, which is, in essence, a crime against God, by trying to screw with the natural order of things. Ed says that you have to be a genius, but I think he's sort of missing the point in that a lot of innovation really boils down to trial and error. Maybe not blind trial and error, but trial and error nonetheless. So with the arrogance they've developed from their intensive studies, they've gathered all the chemical components that make up a human body, and they're preparing to do the deed. So, on its face, it seems like they've done everything right. They've got the circle, they've got the physical ingredients. What could go wrong, really? But it's almost immediately apparent that something is not right, given the ominous glow. And almost immediately, the alchemical reaction begins taking a payment from them, so to speak, for invoking this sort of dark ritual. So this sequence is interesting too, where Ed is inside the gate. And he talks to this rather impish-like creature who informs him that he is the world, the universe, everything, nothing, and also you. The implication being that this figure is God, or approximately as close as you can get to it. Funnily enough, he generally tends to behave more like a trickster god than anything. I don't know, you don't get a sense of divinity just by looking at him. And I gotta say, the animation on Ed's body unraveling is rather disturbing. 'Cause it puts me in mind of, the flaking in your skin you get when you have a sunburn. So, unfortunately, Ed, having seen part of the truth, has learned the wrong lesson. He's seen that human transmutation is indeed possible, but he hasn't fully grasped the true circumstances. And unfortunately for Ed, he also has to pay a toll for the knowledge he's gained. That toll comes in the form of his leg from the knee down. And considering how back in reality he's, bleeding heavily, I'd say that's a rather nasty amputation. The least the truth could have done was cauterize the wound. So, for whatever horrible price Ed paid, Al paid an infinitely greater price in that his entire body was taken. And worse yet, the thing they created could hardly be called a human, much less their mother. It's horribly deformed, it's got exposed ribs, it looks like its bones haven't formed properly. And basically, just as soon as it comes to life, it immediately dies under the weight of its horrible malformation. So I think this scene here is particularly incredible, especially given Ed's age. He shows an incredible determination not to lose the only thing he has left, which is, of course, his brother. And in doing so, he's willing to sacrifice anything of his in order to ensure that his brother survives. So here we have a little interaction between Colonel Mustang and Maze Hughes. And the two of them have a pretty easy association with each other. They're clearly friends and they communicate well. So interestingly, Maze also provides us a little bit of background by asking Colonel Mustang about Edward. And he doesn't really give him an answer, at least not initially. His justification ultimately is that, for whatever hell they've seen in the military, the Elric brothers have seen just as much, if not more. So it seems like Mustang and his subordinate were called in to investigate the human transmutation. And initially, Mustang is understandably upset at the atrocity that was committed. So at this point in time, Edward, having recently suffered the tragedy, he isn't in much shape to talk. Alphonse is slightly better, if only because he doesn't have an actual body, I suppose. So Colonel Mustang sort of sets an offer down on the table. Because the Elric brothers are so skilled, he's offering Edward an opportunity to become a state alchemist. If he does so, he'll gain privileged information, but he'll also be required to serve in the military in times of conflict. Winry's grandmother is initially disapproving, for want of a better term, since Ed and Al have already suffered so much as a result of alchemy, and Colonel Mustang seems intent on throwing them back into it. So over with Lieutenant Hawkeye and Winry, their conversation turns sort of dark. Winry reveals that her parents are also dead as a result of a war, and she resents Mustang and Hawkeye for what she perceives as taking Ed and Al into that sort of a lifestyle, where they would either have to kill or be in the position to be killed. So Mustang takes what I would say is a calculated risk by sort of berating Edward. And he tells him, either you can wallow in that chair forever in self-pity and die, or you can stand up and attempt to fix the problems you've created. And Ed, being in the catatonic state he's in, it might just be the sort of thing he needs to snap out of it. So, Hawkeye seems to have made a decent impression on Winry, if only because she's stating that her reasons for being a soldier is because there are people she needs to protect. Ultimately, it seems like Mustang's gambit worked out, and he was able to snap Ed out of his catatonia. So, unfortunately for Ed, having lost an arm and a leg, he'll have to undergo some pretty extensive surgery to be fitted with prosthetics. And interestingly enough, some of the medical technology here seems reasonably advanced. The prosthetics themselves especially are rather advanced. But that said, it doesn't seem like there's very much in the way of mitigating the pain. So here we have the first instance of Edward not needing the circle to perform alchemy. And Alphonse offers a little tidbit of information that hints at something else we'll discover later, but given that this is the first time Edward's done that, it's notable in that he seemingly couldn't do that before. So now we have Ed testing to be a state alchemist. And notably, he tells a bit of a lie about his prosthetic arm in that he lost it in what he describes as the Eastern conflict because, it wouldn't do to say I tried to commit human transmutation and lost an arm in the process. But his act of a circle-less transmutation, that gets a rise out of everybody. everybody there seems to know how unusual it is, even if they don't necessarily know the reasons behind it. So, here we have an interesting scene where Ed goes as far as to feint an attack at King Bradley here. The idea being he wanted to teach him a lesson on, maybe you shouldn't have a very important person just sort of sitting around out in the open. But Bradley makes it very clear that he was not defenseless in any way. So, despite the affable front Bradley puts up, it's very clear that he means serious business sometimes. He's not to be trifled with. So ultimately, despite his transgression, Ed managed to pass the exam and become a state alchemist. And in the process, he was given the code name of the Fullmetal Alchemist, which seems to be a bit of a joke. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.